男に手をかけられた幼い娘たち。偉大な母である女帝よりも深く思い出につなぎ止めるために。
While many Apothecary fans are busy swooning over Jinshi's pretty boy face or falling in love with Maomao's gremlin personality, there's one character who looms over the entire series despite barely appearing on screen. Of course, I can only be referring to the previous emperor. And for the sake of everyone involved, I will be personally naming him Preem. So do keep that cute name in mind as we talk about his heinous reputation. But back to the matter at hand, Preem is a literal ghost for the simple fact that he isn't even alive in the current canon. That being said, he's still an immensely infamous figure that comes up in every other corner of the Apothecary Diaries story. But what exactly makes the previous emperor such a compelling figure, and how does his shadow cast itself over every major plot point in the series? Let's dive into how Apothecary Diaries effectively uses this ghostly patriarch as a very present character, while also using him as a narrative tool to elevate other living characters in the series.
少女の頃に今の皇帝を生んだ皇太后はその十数年後もう一人子を産んでいる。
The weight of legacy, the cycle of pain. From the very beginning of the series, we're introduced to a world shaped by the previous emperor's choices, even though the man himself is long gone. The inner palace, as we know it, with all its intricate politics and deadly schemes, exists in the form it does because of circumstances regarding Preem. We learn in Season 2, during Lolan's info dump of Vengeance, that the reason the inner palace became as big as it was in the first place is all because Preem wasn't banging any women. Yeah, the most powerful man in the kingdom at the time was actually just a scared loser afraid of responsibility who didn't want to bed any actual women on top of it all. And so it's because of this that Shishu was able to convince Preem's mom, the empress at the time, to allow for an expansion of the inner palace. How was this possible? Well, the empress was not a fan of slavery, and so they turned slavery into an unlimited harem hack for her loser son. Yeah, that doesn't sound all that righteous, but I guess you can only work with what you've got. But just to illustrate how important this event in the world was, remember one of the first things we learn about the world of Apothecary Diaries? Kidnappings are on the rise. In fact, Maomao herself is a victim of this in the very first episode, which kickstarts the entire series. That's right, because of slavery being replaced by the inner palace workforce, young women were more likely targeted as potential sources of profit for the more dastardly. Just as with everything that has to do with governance, politics, and even storytelling, the devil is in the details. While slavery is abolished, the experiences of people like Maomao are very much that of a slave's. It's just a switch up in label. With that in mind, the inner palace isn't just a cage for those kidnapped from the streets. High consorts like Lolan and even charming princes like Jinshi also have the misfortune of calling this palace a prison. And it all leads back to Preem. So what is Jinshi's entire predicament about? Well, he's a guy who's literally running away from his birthright as the imperial brother. And why? Because dear old dad left him a legacy he never asked for. The previous emperor's death didn't just create a power vacuum, it created a prison for Jinshi, trapping him between duty and desire.
この騒ぎで昨日から寝る暇もない。着替えもできてない。
In any case, those keen on the story may know responsibility, as the imperial brother is actually not one of Jinshi's real problems. But that's for a different video, and the fact does remain that he is burdened by lineage one way or the other. However, there is one moment in Season 2 that gives us another angle to the legacy Preem left. The moment the old nurse in the palace writhed in absolute horror and extreme longing when faced with Jinshi's pretty face. Oh no, the horror of a pretty boy. This incident stems from the fact that Jinshi's blessed appearance is actually quite similar to Preem's, who was not bad looking himself. The problem, of course, being Preem's degenerate soul. There's no easy way to go about this piece of info, as it is a central part of his character, so may as well say it now. Preem was a person of twisted tastes involving girls of significantly younger age. That's right, he was the first ever Minecraft YouTuber. This is the root of the fact we discussed earlier of why Preem wasn't keen on betting any women in the first place. He was a man of no talent besides his looks, and a little interesting fact besides his taste in girls. It's from there that we reach yet another of Preem's legacy, Lolan. Her unfortunate upbringing all stemmed from the misfortune that twisted her mother, and where did that stem from? Of course, it was Preem. Remember, Shishu was a pioneer in the growth of the Inner Palace, but the whole reason for that was to eventually save his love, Shenmei, from its walls. As viewers may know, however, this was all a delusion of a simp, as Shenmei willingly chose the Inner Palace. She was always a woman who wanted power, and that power was finally within reach now that she was part of the Emperor's garden. Sadly for her, we know the type of flower Preem likes to pick, and it isn't an old twisted hag who was obsessed with looks. Ultimately, she was never visited by Preem, and after returning to Shishu's arms, she bred a soldier to enact her vengeance upon the kingdom. And that soldier was Lolan. And so, Lolan was cursed with servitude inside the Inner Palace, unable to fully live out the free life she always wanted. Stuck between the machinations of her family, the duties of a consort, and the desire to do right for her sister, Lolan is the epitome of one cursed by the dark legacy Preem left behind. It's unfortunate, really, that a girl as promising as her effectively had her life ruined by a man she never even laid eyes on herself. You know what you should lay your eyes on though? That super thanks button on this video. While you're at it, remember to like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more awesome content like this one. And make sure to join the comments too if you want to share some thoughts about the dark side of Apothecary Diaries characters.
偶然先帝の手にかかり身ごもった幼い娘、そう同情する声もあった。
How far corruption reaches. Now, let's talk about what specifically makes the Preem such a fascinating narrative tool, which we already sort of touched upon. This is, of course, his role as a source of overarching trauma. This isn't just about Jinshi, Lolan, or even the Inner Palace as an institution. It's about the previous Emperor's choices echoing throughout the entirety of the Apothecary Diaries universe. We've already delved into this a bit, but this can be seen most clearly during the Fox Village arc. Yes, it is sort of fueled by Shenmei's revenge against the Preem's neglect of her beauty, but there's also a very political reason behind the Shi clan's machinations. This whole incident at the Fox Village was part of Shishu's plan to quell corruption. At least the corruption coming from his own clan. And as you may already know, the corruption stemmed from Shenmei's time at the palace. Now, this isn't a simple matter of Preem not doing right to Shenmei at the time. I mean, she was literally a hostage. Rather, this situation reflects just how incompetent Preem was in dealing with things on a political scale. Even after indulging in his degenerate behavior, he at one point decides to attempt to do right by his daughter born from a servant by having Shishu marry her. You know, the guy literally asking Preem to free his wife. It's just a strange move, and it ultimately snowballed into spawning more enemies for the crown. He lacked many qualities of a leader, and that included foresight. What's particularly clever is how the series never explicitly tells us whether the previous emperor was a good ruler or a bad one. Instead, we're left to piece together his character through the consequences of his reign. Was he wise or foolish? Benevolent or ruthless? The anime doesn't give us easy answers because that's not the point. The point is that his influence and infamy persist no matter the context, and this is exactly what makes him such an interesting narrative tool. The previous emperor doesn't need to be a fully developed character because his function in the story is to be a catalyst for other characters' development. He's a ghost who is called back through the many characters who have stories that are forever entwined with his legacy. He's an inactive character in a story brimming with intrigue and constantly moving parts.
目論見通り夜とぎはなく、今も身綺麗なままです。
A new dawn with a new emperor. Now I think it's about time to move on to a character who does show up in the current story. The current emperor is not only here to show off his intimidating face, he's here to right the wrong of the emperor of the past. How would he do that? Well, by filling up his high consort harem with only the most well-endowed of girls. But what about Li Shu, you may ask? Well, that is actually an interesting story. Li Shu was taken in as a consort for Preem originally. Thankfully, he was already quite old and in his neat arc of being locked inside a room, so Li Shu managed to remain untouched. Double thankfully, even after all that, the current emperor had Li Shu become one of his high consorts. Not because he inherited his father's taste, but because both he and Aduo wanted to make sure Li Shu would remain as pure as possible. Considering Preem didn't touch her, her value as a consort dramatically dropped, and her own father, who gave her away once already, would have likely used her for even more political schemes. And if you didn't catch that, the current emperor has one definite thing going for him that easily separates him from Preem, and that is having the love of his life in Aduo. I'm sure he's a great emperor just for that reason, though I suppose that isn't saying much considering what came before.
その十数年後、もう一人子を産んでいる。その際、イカンは皇太后につきっきりになり。
Is it better to live as a monster, or to die as a good man? Was Preem really all that bad? Yes, end of video. Thanks for watching. But in all seriousness, just like with many things in Apothecary Diaries, there are still some considerations to be made. Fact is, Preem never wished for a position of power. He was the youngest in the family and the throne was only thrust upon him after his older brother died of disease. That all spiraled into him becoming a political puppet for his mother. You know, the one I said didn't like slaves earlier. So yeah, his mom did abuse him pretty much, and this is presumably what led him to have an attraction to little girls. I shouldn't even have to say this, but you know that's just plain wrong and is not justifiable whatsoever. What it comes down to is the poetry that we can appreciate, and that is Preem is a person of trauma. And it is an unfortunate thing that he himself became the root cause of so many other traumas in the kingdom and in the series as an anime. In the episode where Anshi, the Empress Dowager, sees a painting of a yellow-dressed woman, it's left for us to decipher whether or not the woman is of Anshi or Preem's mother. Both were women who were important to him at one point and both led him down the spiral of trauma. Some fans did point out that the painting itself could be a mini redemption by Preem via admittance. You could take the woman in yellow as Anshi, and alongside that, she's also surrounded by other women who are seemingly younger and smaller. The painting could be Preem's acknowledgement and agreement of Anshi's effort to bring punishment upon himself. When Anshi did what she did to drive the emperor to isolation, Anshi not only enacted vengeance but also became a protector for many young girls in the inner palace. Perhaps in his final days, Preem was able to at least face the reality that he did in fact do many bad things. And maybe that's a good enough redemption arc for a man of his legacy. Were you creeped out by the previous emperor's role in the anime? Aren't you glad he wasn't around during Maomao's time in the inner palace? Then again, I'm sure Maomao would have found a way to get by without giving too much of herself. Right? But anyways, we can't wait to hear your thoughts. And that's all we got for today's video. As always, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below what you thought of today's video. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll be seeing you again next time.